On the 8th of January, 1493, three creatures emerged from the Caribbean waters near Haiti, breaking the surface with such force that Christopher Columbus and his crew stopped everything they were doing. The Admiral of the Ocean Sea, the man who had just discovered a new world, found himself face to face with beings he immediately recognized: mermaids. But here's where our story takes a dark turn, because Columbus's reaction wasn't wonder or excitement. It was recognition mixed with disappointment. You see, this wasn't his first encounter with these creatures. Let me paint you a picture of who Christopher Columbus really was. Forget the simplified version from your history books. This was a man who believed he was literally fulfilling biblical prophecy. In his own words, which I'm quoting directly from his journal, the execution of the journey to the Indies was not aided by intelligence, by mathematics, or by maps. It was simply the fulfillment of what Isaiah had prophesied. Think about that for a moment. The man who changed the course of human history believed he was acting out a script written by God himself. Between 1482 and 1485, a young Columbus had sailed the treacherous waters off West Africa. He'd visited the Portuguese fortress of São Jorge de Mina in what's now Ghana, trading along the Guinea and Gold coasts. And it was there, off the coast of Malagueta, modern-day Liberia, that Columbus first encountered what he described as mermaids. The Malagueta coast, named after a precious spice that Europeans used as a substitute for black pepper, was a place where reality seemed to blur at the edges. Portuguese sailors spoke in hushed tones about the things they'd seen in those waters, and Columbus, still in his early 30s, saw them too. Now fast forward 11 years. Columbus is no longer a young trader, but the admiral who has just discovered what he believes to be the eastern shores of Asia. He spent months at sea, his crew growing increasingly restless, supplies running low. They're sailing near what Columbus calls Rio del Oro on the northern coast of Haiti when it happens. Three figures rise from the water. Columbus's journal entry, preserved through the writings of Bartolomé de las Casas, gives us his exact words. The day before, when the admiral went to the Rio del Oro, he said he quite distinctly saw three mermaids, which rose well out of the sea. But they are not so beautiful as they are said to be, for their faces had some masculine traits. But here's what most historians won't tell you. Columbus didn't just see these creatures and move on. He connected them to his previous sighting in Africa. He said that he had seen some on other occasions in Guinea, on the coast of Malagueta. Think about what this means. Two separate sightings, over a decade apart, on opposite sides of the Atlantic Ocean. Either Columbus was lying, and remember, this was his official journal meant for the Spanish monarchs, or he genuinely believed he had encountered the same type of creature in two completely different parts of the world. To understand why Columbus was so certain, we need to dive deep into the medieval mind. In 1493, mermaids weren't fantasy. They were documented fact. Pliny the Elder, the great Roman naturalist whose natural history was still considered authoritative in Columbus's time, had written detailed accounts of mermaids. He described nereids, creatures with rough, scaly bodies like fish, but human features, found dead on beaches in France. He reported a seaman who climbed onto ships at night off the coast of Spain and could sink vessels if he stayed aboard too long. This wasn't folklore to educated Europeans. This was natural history. Columbus owned and extensively annotated copies of Pliny's work. He also possessed Pierre Dailly's Imago Mundi, which described various sea creatures including mermaids. His personal library, which we know about from inventories taken after his death, contained over a dozen books referencing aquatic humanoids. To Columbus, encountering mermaids was no more surprising than encountering any other documented but rare creature. But there's another layer to this story that changes everything. Columbus wasn't just a navigator. He was a mystic who believed he was living in the end times. After his third voyage, while under house arrest in Spain, Columbus compiled his book of prophecies. This wasn't the rambling of a defeated man. It was a carefully researched collection of biblical passages and prophecies that Columbus believed proved his voyages were divinely ordained. He quoted Isaiah 42:1-4. "Behold my servant, I will uphold him, my elect. My soul delighteth in him. I have given my spirit upon him, and the islands shall wait for his law." Columbus believed that before Christ could return, certain events had to occur. Christianity had to spread throughout the world, the Garden of Eden had to be found, and Jerusalem had to be reclaimed from Muslim rule. He saw his voyages as fulfilling the first requirement. When he reached Venezuela on his third voyage and saw the massive outflow of fresh water from the Orinoco River, he became convinced he had found the biblical paradise. In this context, seeing mermaids wasn't just a curiosity, it was confirmation that he was sailing through the prophesied lands at the edge of the world. The creatures Columbus described don't match our popular image of mermaids. No flowing hair, no beautiful songs, no sitting on rocks combing their locks. Instead, he describes beings with masculine faces that rose well out of the sea. The phrase "rose well out" is crucial. It suggests these creatures projected themselves significantly above the water's surface, behavior that actually matches manatee activity when they surface to breathe or feed on seagrass in shallow water. But here's where our investigation takes an unexpected turn. If Columbus simply saw manatees, why did he immediately identify them as the same creatures he'd seen in Africa? West African waters don't have manatees. They have dugongs, which look similar but behave differently. Moreover, the indigenous peoples of both West Africa and the Caribbean had their own ancient traditions of water spirits. The Taino people of Haiti, whom Columbus had been interacting with for months, had stories of water beings called Aikaya. The West Africans spoke of Mami Wata, powerful water spirits that could take various forms. Could Columbus have been primed by these local beliefs? His journal mentions using African interpreters who had been taught Portuguese, and he was certainly in communication with the Taino through gestures and basic vocabulary. If both cultures independently spoke of humanoid water dwellers, wouldn't that reinforce Columbus's own beliefs? The timing of the sighting is also significant. January 8th, 1493. Just 1 week before Columbus would begin his journey back to Spain. He had lost 2 of his 4 ships. Many of his crew had died or been left behind to establish a settlement. The pressure to return with proof of his discoveries was immense. Yet in the middle of all this stress and urgency, Columbus takes the time to carefully record a mermaid sighting, even comparing it to his previous experience in Africa. This wasn't a passing mention. It was important enough to him to document in detail. Modern historians are quick to dismiss Columbus's mermaids as manatees, case closed. But they rarely address the fundamental question: why did cultures around the world, with no contact between them, independently develop nearly identical stories of half-human, half-fish creatures? The sirens of Greece, the Nino of Japan, the Jengu of Cameroon, the Iara of Brazil, all describe beings that are remarkably similar despite arising from completely different cultural contexts. Let's examine the evidence like detectives approaching a cold case. We have Christopher Columbus, a man whose writings show he was generally a reliable observer. His descriptions of Caribbean islands, their inhabitants, flora, and fauna have been largely confirmed by modern research. He accurately described hurricanes, ocean currents, and magnetic declination before science fully understood these phenomena. So when this same observer reports seeing mermaids on 2 separate occasions, shouldn't we at least consider that he saw something unusual? The manatee theory has holes. First, Columbus was an experienced sailor who had spent years on the sea. He would have seen dolphins, whales, and other marine life. Why would he mistake a manatee, a slow, rotund creature, for something humanoid? Second, his description doesn't match manatee behavior. He says the creatures rose well out of the sea. Manatees barely break the surface when breathing. They don't project their bodies upward in the dramatic fashion Columbus describes. But there's something else. Columbus notes that these creatures had masculine faces and were not as beautiful as they are painted. This suggests he saw facial features clear enough to determine they appeared masculine rather than feminine. At what distance could you determine the gender characteristics of a face? Certainly not from the deck of a ship looking at a manatee hundreds of yards away. Either Columbus got remarkably close to these creatures, or they were larger and more humanoid than manatees. Let me share something that most Columbus biographies omit. During his years in Portugal, Columbus had access to secret navigational charts through his marriage to Filipa Perestrello e Muniz. Her father had been a captain under Prince Henry the Navigator, and the family possessed charts and logs from Portuguese explorations down the African coast. These documents, which Columbus studied extensively, contained warnings about various sea hazards, including areas where sailors reported encounters with sea people. The Portuguese were meticulous record keepers, and their archives, now housed in Lisbon, contain dozens of reports from the 15th century describing encounters with aquatic humanoids. These aren't fairy tales. They're official naval reports filed by captains who risked their careers and reputations by including such information. One report from 1456 describes creatures off Cape Verde that swam alongside the ship for 3 leagues, keeping pace easily, with faces that appeared almost human, but with skin that gleamed like scales in the sunlight. Here's a documented fact that should give skeptics pause. In 1967, off British Columbia's main island, a ferry full of tourists reported seeing a blonde mermaid sitting on rocks, eating a salmon. There were dozens of witnesses. In 2009, multiple people in Kiryat Yam, Israel, reported seeing a mermaid-like figure that would appear at sunset, perform acrobatic maneuvers in the water, and then disappear. The sightings were so consistent that the city council offered a $1 million reward for proof of the creature's existence. That reward has never been claimed, but neither have the sightings stopped. But let's return to Columbus and apply what we now know about his mindset and beliefs. This was a man who spent his final years compiling prophecies, convinced that his discoveries were part of God's plan for the end times. He believed he had sailed to the vicinity of the earthly paradise. In medieval cosmology, the borders of paradise were guarded by fantastic creatures, beings that existed in the liminal space between the natural and supernatural worlds. Mermaids, in this worldview, weren't just animals. They were threshold guardians, marking the boundary between the known world and the divine mysteries. Columbus's Book of Prophecies, compiled between 1501 and 1502, reveals his deep study of apocalyptic texts. He quotes the medieval mystic Joachim of Fiore, who prophesied that the final age of the world would be announced by wonders and signs. Columbus believed he was that herald, and the mermaids were part of the signs. This wasn't superstition. This was the logical conclusion of a worldview shared by the most educated people of his era. Now consider this. We know more about the surface of Mars than we do about our own oceans. Over 80% of our oceans remain unmapped, unobserved, and unexplored. In the past 2 decades alone, we've discovered giant squids, bioluminescent sharks, and entire ecosystems thriving in conditions we thought couldn't support life. The megamouth shark wasn't discovered until 1976. The colossal squid wasn't photographed alive until 2003. If creatures that massive can remain hidden until modern times, what else might be out there? This concludes our video on Christopher Columbus's mermaid encounters of 1493. Whether he saw manatees, unknown creatures, or something else entirely, his detailed documentation gives us a fascinating window into how medieval explorers understood the natural world. If you enjoyed this historical deep dive, please like and subscribe for more explorations into the mysteries of the past. What do you think Columbus really saw that day? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, thanks for watching.